The offshore wind boondoggle, a lesser profiled aspect of the Green New Deal gambit. The what was it? The Danish, yeah, I think Danish company Ørsted. After announcing a potential $2.3 billion write down on its U.S. offshore wind projects, its CEO said it was inevitable consumers would need to pay more for renewable energy since offshore wind faces cost increase in orders of magnitudes. Well, that's certainly not how it was sold several years ago. Back in 2017, for example, the claim was made that green energy costs were at a tipping point and had fallen below those of fossil fuels as technology slashed the cost of offshore wind and solar. Yeah, the brave new world was upon us. The Green New Deal, Biden's I'm talking about, backdoor Green New Deal that they call the Inflation Reduction Act, allows offshore wind developers, unlike their on-land cousins, to claim a minimum 30% investment tax credit, an extra 10% if they use U.S. manufactured equipment, and another 10% if they build their projects in quote-unquote energy communities. But that hasn't stopped these offshore wind developers like Ørsted from demanding more, like exemption from the U.S. manufactured equipment requirement to get that 10% benefit. This, by the way, profiled by Jonathan Lesser at the Manhattan Institute. So who benefits from these projects? Writes Lesser, not U.S. taxpayers. We are going to be forced to send billions of dollars to European firms and the governments that own them. Ørsted's owned by the Danish government. Not consumers and businesses. They don't benefit. They'll be required to pay even higher prices for electricity, reducing economic growth and causing thousands of jobs. Not commercial fishermen and seafood processors, whose livelihoods will be devastated by offshore wind construction and operation of some of the world's most productive fisheries. Not whales. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management recently admitted can be harmed by offshore wind development, contrary to the proponents' dismissal of links between whale deaths and their development as disinformation. Oh, yeah, all the earmarks. And not the climate, which won't be measurably affected by any greenhouse gas reductions associated with offshore wind development. As Lesser continues, using an 18th century technology to meet the needs of a 21st century economy is a costly and futile gesture that will benefit the politically connected few at the expense of everyone else. Now we finally find out the reveal who benefits. Who benefits with all of these gambits? The politically connected few at the expense of everyone else. It's a story that just keeps getting told over and over and over again. Concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. It's public choice theory 101. And unfortunately, ACT scores are dropping, so fewer and fewer people even understand what the hell I'm talking about.
They've been the lowest in 30 years.
Phil Kerpen is president of the American Commitment, chairman of the Internet Freedom Coalition. Phil, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure.
So we were just talking about the offshore wind piece of this story to set up your discussion, which is not dissimilar to the gas-powered cars, which is more relevant to most people's lives. The gas-powered cars part of the Green New Deal story.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable because very similar to what you were talking about there with wind. I mean, there's enormous subsidies now for electric vehicles, just enormous, almost incomprehensibly large. You know about the $7,500 direct subsidy to the purchaser. You probably know about the direct $10 billion, $12 billion direct payments to manufacturers. But of course, there's also billions for charging stations. There's also $50 billion in government-directed, government-guaranteed loans that the Energy Department has in a pot and can choose who gets them, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other things in terms of money. But with all of that, people still mostly don't want them. About 93% of vehicle sales are still internal combustion engines. EVs are sort of struggling, even with all of that financial support from taxpayers, to get up around 7% where they are now. And what's really going to drive the quote transition, to the extent such a thing happens, is not all of that sea of taxpayer money, which is inadequate, even with. Oh, by the way, the manufacturers are still taking huge losses on every one they sell, even with all the subsidies. Ford said they're losing $32,000 on every EV they sell. So, I mean, they're selling the things for over $60,000 each. Even with all the subsidies, they're losing $30,000. And even with them being sold with massive subsidies and being sold at a loss, people still mostly don't want them. They mostly want internal combustion vehicles. So the key to what Biden's trying to accomplish then is not the subsidies, even with which people still prefer internal combustion engines. The key to it are the mandates. And this is the part that gets talked about less and that is less understood. But this is really the stick that over the next few years is going to get pretty severe. As I mentioned, we're at about 7% of the Biden administration regulations, which purport to be miles per gallon regulations, but really are not, because they mandate miles per gallon that no internal combustion vehicles can meet, and they do it on a specific schedule designed to mandate electric vehicles. There's a schedule embedded in the Biden regulations that says the percentage of EV sales in the whole fleet that need to be every year to meet the requirements of the mandate. And we're at 7% now. They mandate 17% for model year 26, which is right around the corner, less than 2 years away, 30% for model year 27. And it just goes up from there. They get to 50% in 2030, 67% in 2032. And of course, you know, when they're mandating that these very large percentages, even the ones in the next couple of model years when they hit, when they're mandating that these percentages much higher than people actually want to be EVs, that's going to artificially restrict the supply that's available of non-EVs, of internal combustion vehicles, and they're going to become increasingly difficult to find and very expensive.
Well, do you think they'll?
Consumer preference is 90% plus people want internal combustion, but the manufacturers are only allowed to sell, you know, a much lower percentage. It's pretty easy to see what's going to happen.
Well, do you think there'll ever be a time when the government comes in and tells, automakers you cannot make any more gas-powered vehicles?
Well, let's think about that. So the end of the current Biden rule ends in the model year 2032, and it gets to 67% of all vehicles sold need to be electric vehicles. The Biden administration has also granted a waiver to California to set their own standards, and California goes to 100%. They go to the ban that you mentioned in 2035. I think 10 or 11 states have now followed California. It's pretty clear to me that when they keep adding more years to this, let's say Biden gets a second term and, you know, they do a few more iterations of this and they add 2033 and 34 and 35, they're going to keep going up. You know, they're not going to stop at 67. So it's pretty clear that the eventual endpoint is 100% and a prohibition on the sale of internal combustion vehicles. As I mentioned, that's already California's got that on the books, and the states will follow them for 2035. And I think pretty clear that's where Biden's headed. And what's going to happen is people are either going to spend a fortune on these electric cars that are not going to suit them especially well, but they're going to be over $100,000, and they're going to need a huge loan to get them, or they're going to spend a fortune on the dwindling number of internal combustion vehicles that are still allowed by the government to be sold, and those are going to be over $100,000 also, and you're going to need a 10-year loan or be wealthy to get them. Or what I think most people are going to deal with is sort of a Cuba-like scenario where they need to drive used cars forever, because a lot of people are just not going to be able to afford new cars, period, under the regime that's come.
And by the way, if you do convert to get ahead of the curve here, as you're saying, to help Biden meet his goals, and you say, well, at least I'll leave $5 gasoline in the rearview mirror, you will, but unless you're able to hook your EV up to one of those subsidized offshore windmills, the electricity costs may surprise you.
Yeah, electricity costs are rising pretty quickly, and like many things, it's much worse in the blue states than the red states. But electricity costs are up about 30% nationally, and like I said, with a lot of variation by state. Although you're a little bit lucky in Illinois. You're one of the only blue states that doesn't have outrageously high electricity costs. I think because you still have nuclear plants.
Yeah,
but
most in the country.
Direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you're headed in the direction of higher prices at some point, because that's what liberals like. But the point is, your point is absolutely correct. If you put electric vehicles onto a grid that's already supply constrained because of other liberal policies that make it difficult to deploy new electricity generation, then you're not reducing energy demand. You're just shifting the form of it, and you're going to drive up electricity prices and cause shortages of that, which, of course, we're already seeing in California. And by the way, in California, where they've got, something like 40 or 50% of all the EVs in the country, they regularly have blackouts and brownouts. They have a very strained electricity grid. They have the highest electricity prices in the country outside of, I think, Hawaii, which is an island, so they can be excused. And the solution that they've proposed, the solution that the legislature is probably going to pass, is not to add more electricity generation, but to make all of the home EV chargers two-way chargers, so that when the grid needs more power, they can drain people's cars to power other things, which is just an insane idea, but I think they're headed in that direction.
He is Phil Kerpen, president of the American Commitment, chairman of the Internet Freedom Coalition as well. Phil, thanks as always.
All right, have a good one, guys.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Homeowners experiencing low water pressure, rusty yellow water, little to no hot water, or pressure so low that showering is difficult?
Honey, don't flush. I'm in the shower.
These are all symptoms of clogged and corroded galvanized water pipes that are filled with gunk older than you. You should see it. It's disgusting. You drink it, brush your teeth with it, and bathe in it. Yuck. For your family's sake, repipe your home with